It's time to talk type. And first of all, I would like to thank our sponsors, Google Fonts, Mooniac, Sense Imagery, Magic Monkey Salon, and Context. Now I know you're not here to listen to me speak, and also we have got to wrap this up by 9. So let me quickly go through the introductions for our 5 panelists. First of all, we have Professor Gerry Leonidas. Gerry teaches typography and typeface design in the Department of Typography and Graphic Communication at the University of Reading, England. He is the president of International Typographic Association, ATypI, and is a co-founder of ISTVZ and Grantian Foundation. He's got decades of experience in the field and is a practicing type designer of Greek and Latin typefaces. And secondly, we have Miss Pooja Saxena. Pooja is a type designer, typographer, and letterer with a focus on Indian scripts. She has studied typeface design at the University of Reading and interned with the fonts team at Apple. She has worked in the typeface projects of GNOME and Google Fonts, among others. She has also taught at several design schools in India, including the National Institute of Design. And thirdly, we have Mr. Lalindra Nanayakkara. Lalindra Nanayakkara, or Nana, as is known by many, has over 25 years of experience in advertising and communication. He has created iconic campaigns for leading Sri Lankan companies, such as Sri Lanka Telecom, Mobitel, Selinco, and for leading international companies, such as Coca-Cola and Nestle. His work has been featured in the prestigious Lazarus Archive and is the recipient of numerous awards. Currently, he is the Executive Creative Director at Leo Burnett, Sri Lanka. And fourthly, we have Mr. Muthu Nedumaran. Muthu has over 3 decades of experience in typography. His type designs are now bundled into operating systems like macOS, Windows, iOS, and Android. His creation, Inaimati, is used as the standard type for Tamil text by the Ministries of Education in Singapore and Malaysia. Besides typography, Muthu has also innovated and built fast and efficient input methods for all the languages he works on in various platforms. He is the founder of Murasu Systems. And last but not the least, we have our moderator for the evening, Mr. Pathum Egodawatta. Pathum is a Sri Lankan typeface designer, font engineer, and a researcher of typography. He specializes in type and typography of South Asian scripts. He has studied at University of Reading and the Academy of Design, Colombo. I had a much bigger introduction, but he cut out the rest of it, so... So please give a round of applause for Pathum.
But he has a big chair.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay, how do I...
Yes, okay. Hi. Okay, so if you look at the titles, it has some like words like typography, text technologies, and fonts as infrastructure. So what I'm interested in and what we are trying to talk about today is how fonts and typography and related areas and the intersections of technology and these aspects can contribute and how they affect our economy and culture. So I would like to sort of start the discussion with Gerry. And what is the relationship of a script and a writing system and the economy and the culture? How does it sort of relate to? It's a very open-ended question, and then we can go on from that, I think.
Okay, I'll try to narrow it down because indeed it is quite an open question. And you can think the script very simply is visual mechanics for encoding a language. And it's something that is quite fluid because it's subjective depending on the tools that people use and also how language evolves. evolves, and also it can include quite a lot of variations regionally, even within fairly short periods. What is, however, interesting is that once you start looking at typographic environments where you have the need to have systematized versions of that script, then the script becomes something much more rich and becomes a typographic script, which means it's a technological issue that involves decisions about what you leave in and what you leave out. It's something that needs to interact with systems, in which case you need to say, what is it possible to do within the technology we have that is close enough to the shapes that people make with their whatever writing tools. And it is also a political issue, because you need to decide which is the reference version of the language that we're going to represent visually. And that is something that applies, again, across cultures. So these comments are entirely culture and script agnostic. But whether your script will accommodate diacritics of a certain kind might mean that French or Polish might be pronounced in a specific way or not, or some part of the community might be marked out as a minority linguistically, who need special treatment so that they can train their children to read in their version of the script. And this is a fairly simple case where you might have a huge overlap in most of the forms in that script, but then the minority also needs a few more diacritics or a few extra characters and so on. The story of turning things that have almost infinite flexibility in their set and configurations, which means whatever you want to do if you're writing by hand, into things that systems allow us to use, is always a history of compromise. It's a huge, unfortunate event in the history of, say, visual communication, that most of the technology was developed by people using the simplest form of representing language, and that would be Anglo-Saxon English, sort of North American English mostly, which is a form of the Latin script that carries no diacritics. The configurations of the system are fairly simple. There are no complex rules in the behavior of individual little black bits, depending on what other bits are next to them and so on. So you have similarly a technology that is fairly simple in how it treats the individual units of the system. Therefore, the modularization that we see was possible to achieve with fairly simple technologies throughout the 500 years of typographic development. And everybody else is in trouble. Because if you want to do anything else other than fairly simple sort of English style typography, you're in trouble because the character sets might not be large enough, or the behavior of the system might not be complex enough to accommodate what you want. You also have quite a lot of systems level approaches. So the simplest thing might be at the systematic level, the modular typography of hand setting doesn't allow things to butt up. You cannot join shapes, which is fine for Latin, and Greek and Cyrillic, not very good for Arabic, where you have a cascading and connecting script. So something that's quite integral to the feature of the technology doesn't allow you to do this. So then you might say, okay, I still want to be able to typeset Arabic. Therefore, which are the compromises that I am willing to make? Essentially means which are the compromises that I think I can get away with imposing on my audience in order to achieve that kind of thing. So this dialogue always happens. And at the other end of the scale, in fairly current technology, we have the work that Muthu has been doing, which is a very good example of this, where you might say, I've got a thing that's a little computer. If I want these communities to use them, they need to be able to see their script on. What is the minimum viable form of that script that people will at least accept so that their messaging will not be terrible, and maybe they will not be doing sort of weird transcriptions of their language in English, in Latin characters, which a lot of people do, and we cannot. Everybody has done that at some point, but then how do you move beyond that? So this idea of making a script that is possible to represent at a sufficiently good enough level of fidelity to the forms that people expect to see, in its full richness and complexity, and in a way that people can interact with, is absolutely central to then them buying that phone or their computer, or making their bookings online, or reading that book that came out of print on demand, or doing all sorts of services that we expect. And that is the interesting connection with the theme of the panel, where you're saying that, okay, fonts in themselves might or might not be a product in this case, but they're absolutely fundamental for all the products that sit above them in a stack. So if I'm saying I'm building a travel business, well, I cannot book my ticket unless I can read the text that will tell me that, because actually it is culturally wrong to force me to do this in English. And maybe, in 1995, that was an okay compromise because the system was not able to deal with this. But maybe in the last 20 years, the systems can actually allow us quite a lot of complexity in how they support scripts. So therefore, the bar raises. And you need to say, in order to serve that community with respect, I need to be able to represent the script at a certain level that will enable all of these services with the precision that reflects the depth of that culture and those interactions.
Yeah, so I would like to sort of turn to Muthu from that perspective. So you have worked on supporting the scripts of the region and quite complex scripts, and worked on a number of platforms as well. So what challenges do you see sort of common to these supporting these languages and making, like, enabling computing in these languages to start with? We can sort of go into the other sort of modes of expression and then the sort of creative expression in the next in the next topics, but I'm interested in sort of discussing this as a functional platform. What are the sort of common things you see in this?
Is it on? Yeah. When I first started doing work with a non-Latin script, that was like 1985. I was working on a Tamil script because that's the language we speak back in Malaysia. The aim was, I had no idea what typography, or have not even heard the word font at that time. But the goal was to enable someone to input, create some documents or text on a computer, because we have already seen the benefit of doing that in English, and we want to translate that to Tamil at that time. So there were multiple challenges. The first was to display the text on the screen, because there was no such thing as through type at the time, and they were like bitmap images. So I'm an engineer. I still am, pretending to be a typeface designer. So I yanked off boards, took off chips, reverse engineered, and figured out how they were rendering the ASCII characters, so the Latin text on the computer, and then replaced those characters that were not used in Malaysia and Singapore, the non-English other European letters, and replaced them with Tamil, finding my own ways of encoding them. Some letters were like done in two different pieces because they can't sit into the given window for a single character. And then wrote assembler routines to allow users to type. All these were trying to accommodate, trying to fit into something that was done for a completely different system, for a completely different language system. Now you fast forward, after that, of course, to design fonts for printing and all that stuff came along. But fast forward 30 odd years, 3 over decades. Now, if I look back, if you ask me, was that the right approach? Definitely not. I would even go and say that a keyboard is probably not the correct input tool or proper input tool for languages in this region, right? The Chinese, they have done, they have adopted the keyboard using a Hanyu Pinyin input method, or they even have strokes. If you write Chinese on a phone, you actually write Chinese. You don't type Chinese. The reason why regional languages are not used in messaging or other communication is because it's so difficult to type, even for people like me. I'm a native Tamil speaker. I speak Tamil equally well, but it's so difficult to express on a keyboard, which was designed for some other language. So that's the goal. That's how we started. And then when I started studying about typography and font design, again, we were trying to fit into something that was designed for a system completely alien to us. We had something like an X height. We had a baseline. We had an accenter. And we have characters that go beyond that and go below especially in Indian languages when you have stacked consonants that go, downwards. But I mean, we don't have a choice. I mean, we didn't invent those systems, so we have to probably accommodate. But now that technology has enabled a lot of things that were not possible before, I'm quite excited to go and explore those areas, both in terms of design of typefaces, as well as the input method. So I'm still keeping both my interests, engineering and design. And I think it's possible doing that. And I also think that the world has woken up to realize that there are people who speak languages written in scripts other than Latin. In fact, during ATypI, we had a forum among the designers or the creators of typeface design tools. And I think Gerry popped up the question. It says, when will we see a time when you open file new, it prompts you as which script you want to create your typeface in, and then gives us the framework for that script instead of giving you an X height and a baseline. But that's not too far away. It probably is already happening. So it's quite exciting for me, and that's the reason why I started doing this a bit more seriously these days.
Yeah, I think just to sort of like add on, like in a type design software, when we open up a new file, it automatically gives me the Latin alphabet boxes to fill in, and along with the proportions and other things to fill out. So I think so over the years now we are in a position where there is the technology is enabling higher sort of levels of typographic usages. And for example, I think the advertising community in the audience and anybody who's worked with Sinhala knows that it's really hard to work in InDesign or other tools to like design in Sinhala, and actually you can't still use Unicode fonts like OpenType plus Unicode fonts for a lot of languages. So I'd like to go to Pooja. So you have worked on a number of Indian script and Latin script font projects, and why is making fonts for regional scripts, is it like more time consuming and different to the process of Latin, and what are the inherent challenges and in design and production of fonts for these regions?
I guess it would be obvious to most of you that it is much more time consuming to work in a non-Latin script, and working in India where, like for instance today when I was hearing the talks that were happening, I was kind of, when people were discussing how, like for instance, in Sri Lanka, you're looking at 3 scripts, and that kind of, now suddenly accommodates a large part of the population. When you're looking at India and you're looking at multilingual projects, 3 scripts does not cut it. So just by virtue of that, a multilingual project means, just the scale becomes larger because the number of scripts and languages you need to tackle to reach a large group of people is so much bigger. Then, of course, there is the obvious part that just the number of, discrete things you have to design to make, any of the Indian scripts work is much larger than what you need to design for, Latin. And similarly, the engineering work that goes in is, much greater. But I think beyond that, what also makes the work greater is that there is a lot of, for the lack of a better word, education around doing a project such as that. I mean, often you will have, say a client come to you with a problem, but they don't actually understand why it's being caused, or the very fact that a typeface could solve it. And even if a typeface could solve it, chances are that the people they're working with have no clue how to, say, even install that typeface and make it work, in any given software. There's also that there is a legacy of using non-Unicode ASCII-based, typefaces, which continues even today. There are newspapers which don't use Unicode-compliant typefaces, and there is a lot of resistance to move from that system to one which, to us, is very obviously the better one. But because it has gone on for so long, it is a huge challenge to convince people to give up on those and actually move to a new system, which to them feels kind of stupid because in the ASCII system, there's only so many characters. To them, it makes no sense that suddenly you want to like draw 900 characters. To them, it seems like a waste of time and money economically, and so they may not be, as willing to engage in a activity like that. So I think it's not just that they're complex because the scripts are complex, but I think the situation surrounding those projects are also quite difficult.
Yeah, thanks. So I think so. I would like to move to Nana with the question of you are a user of a font and you have a lot of people using fonts under you as well. And in Sri Lanka, you have worked on different campaigns. And what are the challenges you face when using the fonts, and also planning and executing campaigns in local languages in your practice? And thoughts about sort of multi-script design that you have to face in the practice.
Right. I think the biggest problem when it comes to local font is the lack of choice. So we end up, when we practice or when we apply it into, because I come from communication and advertising background, so when we apply it to our day-to-day work, you will find that we would use the same font to communicate about a political party. Maybe sometimes we might even use that font for a biscuit, and simply because we don't have that wide variety that maybe the English fonts have. Creating that identity for different brands through the font or through typography gets very limited. And I think another problem that we have is that when you're trying to develop things locally, the process that goes into it, unfortunately, you have to come up with a local solution, but the process that tells you to come up with the solution is not local. For example, if you're working in an agency, you would know, the brief that you get, you will never get a singular brief, no. You will get an English brief, but they will tell you, hey, it's a mass market product. So come up with a local concept for it. But the whole thinking that is trying to help you to come up with the solution, the process is not locally managed. So I think that is a big challenge. And obviously the third challenge I would say is cost or the budgets, so how much can you actually allocate for typography or for expressing through type, because the budgets are, it's not as big as sometimes that you get in other countries or in other markets. You might have some clients that have much bigger budgets, but in reality, the only font that we have developed for a client in Sri Lanka is for Sri Lankan Airlines, right? And that was 8 years ago, 10 years ago. But here you tell a client, hey, we want to develop a font. We ourselves have tried it. We try to develop fonts for banks. Either the time that they would want it, hey, can we do it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks? Or if you go into a cost proposal, it'll go into, they would not see the importance of, why you need to have this tool.
Yeah, I think that is the lack of the selection and lack of the available voices in your as you can almost think about the fonts as a designer's toolbox for the voices. I would like to turn to Pooja. You have been doing some research and documentation projects in about Indian languages and sort of using the inspirations, and you wrote on your bio that you draw on their Indic scripts, rich body of styles and shapes to create lettering with a distinctive identity. Can you talk a bit about this identity and how the lack of fonts maybe affect the how we express identity?
I think one of the things, for instance, in Indian scripts in the last few years, there has definitely been a growth in terms of the number of typefaces that are available, not in all scripts, but say a Devanagari, which is a major script, has a lot more typefaces. But unfortunately, what you see, and I'm party to this having happened, as are most people who design type in Devanagari, is that a lot of designs that have been made are merely extensions of what even Latin type designers often will call boring designs. You know, they are sans serif, they're sort of kind of humanist, maybe some are geometric or some kind of unholy marriage of the two. And they are, you know, they're what brands look like, right? And I don't know if they do seem like the kind of fonts which you could use to both sell a political party or a biscuit, because, you know, that is what they look like. And I think that is a bit of a sad situation to be in. So, you know, for instance, you see a lot of, you know, Latin script-based designers also, for instance, grieve the fact that so many new typefaces look like that. But if you think of it in the context of Indian scripts, it's even worse, because that is then the majority of the typefaces you have. Right? So which is really unfortunate. So it is in that kind of context that I say that it's possible for, one, designs to not start as, you know, something that is matched to a Latin typeface, but perhaps possible that something starts from another script, even if it then includes Latin, right? So then you're coming to things from a different perspective. Also, potentially the resources, the visual resources you might be referring to become quite different, rather than looking at things Latin only. So yeah, mostly that it's possible to sort of start, whether it's lettering or typefaces, from the perspective of another script rather than from Latin. And I think that itself would help have more distinctive designs and therefore bring like a sense of identity through those designs.
Yeah, I think a lot of the designers in the region, and also even in Sri Lanka, currently we are seeing sort of looking back and looking around for more inspiration and sort of drawing inspiration from those things. But I would like to sort of come back to the idea of the standards and technology to cover things a bit. I would like to turn to Gerry. So we spoke about this variety and the issues that we see. So one of the main aspects of establishing the technology and the tools and other resources for typography or scripts is developing universal standards for the writing systems. So when we are talking about universal standards, it means by definition we have to sort of smooth out certain things, right? How does the process of this developing standards would affect the identity and like a nature of the script and the culture?
Yes, I mentioned already the problem of the character set, of what goes in there. So somebody needs to decide how many characters do you need at the minimum to say, I support this language. And I say at a minimum because most companies will work on a basis of it works 98% of the time for 98% of the users for 98% of the documents, because there are quite a lot of fairly detailed or extreme document types that might need specialist use. But if you say, what's the range of document most people see during the daily life, that might be a good starting point. And then once you try to see the complexity of the communities, or if you start searching into time, that might change. But let's say you've got a pretty good idea of what the character set is. Let's say also you've got a really good access to manuscript evidence that tells you what are the configurations of the arrangement of the shapes without them being, let's say, intervened or polluted by the compromise of intermediate technology. So if I want to find out how do I support properly Tamil or Sinhala, I shouldn't be looking, say, at handset Tamil or Sinhala, because that was already compromised so that it would fit there. I might need to go and say, I need to look at manuscript sources just to get an idea of what are the configurations of shapes. Is there variation between shapes or not? And then I would probably need to look at different formalities of documents and across different periods, and that you can do it. It's a research project, you can do it. So you might think, okay, tick, support the script. I'm going to leave aside the hyphenation and the spelling documents. If the language hyphenates, you need to have proper hyphenation dictionaries in the system. If it doesn't hyphenate, you need to have routines that tell you how to arrange things in columns. Do you need to spell check the thing? We mentioned Arabic earlier. Arabic is not a thing that you can spell check. It's a script. You might have languages that use the script, and each of them needs a knob on your document that says, oh, I'm using this kind of Arabic for I'm typing this kind of Arabic because if I'm typing the Arabic spoken in Egypt or in Syria or in Libya, they might be used different spellings. So that's another thing of, oh, I support the script or not. Let's leave that aside. But then, so you've got all of that stuff. You've got this amazing system that will sort of arrange the shapes in time. But what does support mean? Because at one end of the scale, you might say, support means I can enable someone to hit a keyboard or make a scratch on the screen or whatever, and something that looked like a good enough representation of the script will appear on screen. At the worst end of the scale might be a typewriter, and we think, okay, that's a really poor technology tool. We're going to accept a lot of compromises there. At the other end of the scale might be a phone that should do a pretty good job. But that's just me speaking in a very monotone voice, and all the texts sound exactly the same, but they're political parties or they're advertising for detergent. And that's the typographic equivalent of having one font. So this sort of, my knob has gone from 0 to 1. I can support a script in the way that it will not die out, and I can ensure that the stuff that people say or want to encode will survive. That's not a very interesting level. It's essential for scripts, but doesn't get you very far. So maybe sort of knob 2 of support means I can do transactions. I can enable schools, businesses, your bank account to operate, functions of the everyday life. It might be, I need to go to the ATM and get money out, and that thing needs to give me enough differentiation so I can tell the difference between this is just the machine talking to me and this is a button that I interact with. Or if I've got a school document, this is the voice of the teacher that tells me fill out the letters, and this is the voice of the student, which is I need to copy these things. So maybe there's 2 or 3 different traditionalism or innovation or conservatism that is reflected in the script. Because if you say, I'm going to use the same typeface for a progressive party and a conservative party, then I need to rely on a lot of other things to get the message across. If I want to say this kind of book is traditional literature that's very historical, and this thing is a very radical manifesto about sort of rethinking how we do social welfare, probably I need a different kind of typography for this. We might also say, and that taps into your comment, a lot of the scripts in India are modulated, and that's the traditional impression we get growing up in India. Certainly if you're my generation, you grew up with a lot of the scripts being modulated. Therefore, you might say, modernity is what my parents didn't do. Therefore, I want something that looks different than what I grew up with. And actually, we know pretty well that what I've seen between, 4, when I have memories, and about 16, is what I think is normal, if I'm a normal person. You have to be really reflective to see through that. So then I will rebel if I want innovation by going against what I grew up with. I saw modulated Devanagari when I was growing up, and my school books were full of that stuff. So modernity will be something that's monoline. Now, probably the young students who are growing up with monoline Devanagari on their phones now every day, they'll grow up and say, this is just so boring and monotonous, and my parents' texts are so sort of lacking of character. I'm going to seek innovation and identity in something that is more modulated and rich. And as it happens, maybe modulated styles might give you more potential to express this richness. But we've seen this in a number of scripts where imported ideas, usually of modernity and identity, from scripts that have this more developed, which is usually the Latin, because a lot of design education imports these ideas, have been saddled on top of traditional forms of the script by a generation that is seeking to identify itself with modernity. And it usually happens that people have imported a low contrast, more technical looking style as modern and innovative and so on, simply because they're rebelling against the modulated style. We go through this, we have to take a deep breath, run through the next 10 years, and then say, okay, can we now return to something a bit more rich and interesting? We can do it. The trick is to make sure that the designers of these typefaces actually keep investigating the potential of the scripts to provide this richness and this opportunity for identity, because that would be closer to the development of the scripts. So it has more richness because it's connecting to the richness of the forms that people made by hand or the lettering they made. And it is also something that allows you to develop richness without reference to external factors. And especially if you're talking about traditions of writing that go back hundreds or thousands of years, they're pretty certain to have that kind of richness inside them. There are exceptions, so there are invented scripts which happened in the 19th century. Some guys sat down and said, I'm going to invent a script for Cherokee. Okay? There you don't have the same kind of depth of writing that will give you the sense of modernity. But in Devanagari, you've got it. It goes back a few thousand years, the roots of it. So there's probably enough richness in the forms that you can do it. And the burden falls on educators to impress on students the need to be aware of this richness, and also authorities, again, to see the richness that is possible to combine a sense of modernity with also something that reflects the depth of tradition and form-making in the culture.
Yeah, I think the richness of the typographic palette and what's available for us is an issue that we are facing in Sri Lanka, like especially for Sinhala. We have a set of fonts which were developed around 20 years ago, which have been in use in the advertising and publishing industry forever. So I would like to turn to Nana again with the question of with the end of the war and with the sort of new developments that we are seeing, there's a huge expansion of the businesses and also the opportunities that we seek. So with these new businesses rising, and what are the sort of new challenges that you see, and do you see specific challenges in this context which relates to typography and use of letters?
Yeah, Pathum, on that one, I think I would disagree on you on one thing. I think the boom didn't happen as much as we wanted it to. We expected like this massive change to happen, the society to change, the thinking to change, but it has taken some time for it to come. And right now, if you take a look at the market, because I won't say it's a downturn, but like the economy is not moving as fast as we would like it to. So because that there are behavioral changes that happen in consumers. So one of the biggest challenges is consumers then start seeing how can they get the best for their buck, or their behavior of how can they manage with the limited resources they have. So you would find things like the people will spend less time in supermarketing than they would there's more people now going to Polar to see what can they, either they can get fresh or they can get it cheaper. And that same thing will happen not just in consumer commodities, but like in other commodities as well. So in that way, the onus falls on us then. How can we talk smarter? How can we develop voices or develop looks and feels that will create an identity for the different brands that we have? So then you have that importance of fonts also coming in, because if you're going to develop an identity for different brands, you need to have different tools to be able to do that. So in that way, I would say it's quite rich right now that for us to start that discussion to say, hey, there is a need for us to develop these different voices or different types for different needs. Because right now the market will need it. Otherwise, we would all end up looking same. And maybe the push clients into a long term to help them also to see that there are certain things that you need to find solutions long term. Developing a font voice or developing a type for themselves is not a short term solution. It's a long term solution. So to help people realize, hey, if you do that now, they said that during the recession, during the World War recession, the brands that actually communicated during that time rather than cutting down are the ones that created a strong voice for themselves. I remember this example of this milk. It's a ready-to-drink milk. When it came into the market, I happened to work in the agency that was doing that. And when they launched it, the results are phenomenal. They had a 600% growth because there was no other competitor. And what they did, they just launched it and that's it. They didn't do anything. 3-4 years later, there were 4 competitors. And this brand today is not even among the top 4 because so many others have come because they thought, okay, if people are buying it, you don't need to communicate. But you need to communicate. And when there is a need for you to communicate, then even typography plays a big role.
Yeah, thanks. So I think I'll just jump into this idea of, so every time when the market expands or the new requirements arises, then there's a need for, or the mediums sort of expand, right? So when we were trying to figure out how to develop fonts for the publishing industry and the publishing frameworks and the tools, then we are here in Sri Lanka trying to figure this out, and then we have the mobile phones coming in, and then the new technologies, all these coming in. And then when we have a smaller market, when the size of the market doesn't sort of allow an investment into developing the technologies, there is an issue. So what are the sort of challenges you see in, you're an engineer, but yes, yeah. So developing, or adapting to new technologies and new mediums while these changes are happening for these markets, do you see any specific challenges? And I'm actually interested about sort of shared challenges that you see across languages.
I think the issue of the market, if you're looking at it as an opportunity for business development, the issue of the market size being small does play a part if you only stick to that particular market. But if you look at the languages of the region, they all share common features. They all share there is some commonality because they all emerge from the same fundamental Brahmi family of scripts. So I would probably expand into the region and see how we can reuse our expertise in other scripts or other regional scripts as well. That can be challenging. It can impose a lot of constraints in the way you look at. I mean, when you look at a foreign script, you probably can understand and you can recognize how beautiful it is, but you may not understand how it flows. What are the inherent nature of the script? How do people write it? And we need to understand it before we can start developing something or designing something for that, or find people who are able to help us understand that. So I took the second way in finding people who will be able to just tell me that this is how this will work, this is how it will work. This looks native to me. This doesn't. I can't connect to this at all. I've also seen the reverse happening when people design typefaces for the South Indian scripts or even Sinhala scripts that it doesn't come from a calligraphic background, and they start introducing calligraphic texture to the South Indian. Well, it doesn't look natural to me. It looks nice, it looks beautiful, but it doesn't connect. So these are ways we can cross-germinate ideas to develop new typefaces and introduce them to the market and see people accept that. That's one way I try doing.
So I would like to just come back to the word infrastructure. What is infrastructure? What does it mean, and how does it relate to the things that we have been talking about? So by sort of looking at the definitions of infrastructure, just to get an idea, so it's shared resources with high cost but covers basic functionality of a system. So how does this idea of considering typography and the fonts as infrastructure to the function of the design process of a designer sort of help to understand the common problems and maybe invest in more developments together to do things. So this is one of the ideas that we have been exploring. What can we do as type people or people interested in typography in general to push this idea forward and sort of share more things? I would like to turn to Gerry.
I think we covered already the idea that fonts are obviously the plumbing of communication. You have it. If you don't have the fonts, your documents don't work, your economy doesn't work. Yeah, you can watch Netflix videos all day. That's not an economy. That's just what you do after you're tired all day, building up the economy. But anything that regards interactions, regards the documents, fonts are absolutely essential in this. And because the range of our interaction are complex, fonts, again, cannot be of one only appearance, one only style, one only behavior. They do need to have a richness that corresponds to the richness of our kind of interactions. Again, in terms of formality and in terms of associations we make with them. And that is something that shouldn't need too much explaining, because if you just look at the kinds of documents that someone who is active in the economy comes across every day, either actively or passively, they do represent a completely huge range of tones of voice and degrees of attention and interaction. So I think it's quite appropriate that fonts also respond to this. For any society that wants to be operating as a mature economy on that level, instead of I enable rich interactions between the members of the society so they can be productive, the fonts are an essential part of this interaction. What is also interesting that it taps into benefits on top of just the functionality of the document. So yes, a font that makes my banking application look okay and functional will enable me to make my transactions. It also builds trust to the institution. I leave aside whether we want to have trust to the banks, but it then means that I actually have an institutional relationship that's reinforced with through the typography map, because it looks sufficiently close to all the other emissions of communication by the bank. If my banking app looked very different than my desktop version of the app or the browser or the stuff I get in the post, I'd be thinking, that's not very coordinated. Is this a different team? Or do they keep different records from my bank account than that team and so on? So you want to see how these things connect. If the state talks to me with a different typographic voice when it sends me my tax bill and when it sends me my utility bills, or it sends me a notification that the road works down outside my house, is it different authorities or is it coordinated? That actually has taken place in a lot of countries in Europe now, where public authorities at different levels, all the way from the government to regional authorities, develop their own branding typefaces. And you may think, hold on, you're spending tax money on brands? But the answer is, because we spend tax money on the road cleaning and the garbage collection and the schools, I want you to know every time you see the garbage truck that it's your money that pays for it. And what does it is the fact that the typography is controlled in a way that says, oh, this is the state garbage truck, and not some private company that we're paying probably a premium for to do this for us. So again, you see the public voices using typography through typeface choices to control the messaging that they give to the community. And that's essential, because if you want to put a message on the side of a garbage truck and also the hospital and also the pavement, you can't really do it in many ways other than just falling back on a typeface that has consistent typographic arrangement. So it becomes a very important political tool to build consistency in a community and the perceptions and the relationships with authorities. And you might say, what sort of infrastructure is this? Well, that's political infrastructure, because it helps the relationships between different layers in society to operate smoothly. So if you're trying to think, how do I build a well-functioning community? the first thing you want to do is to ensure that the communication relations between them in their full richness can be supported well in a way that reinforces the sense of identity in the community in a healthy way. It allows it to interact with other communities, internationally primarily, with a sense of confidence in itself, and also to grow its local economy internally with others. And I think that is quite at the heart of this.
Yeah, I would like to sort of look at how this sort of identity and this discussion could sort of feed into people working on the fonts and developing fonts, and how we can try and address as designers in the audience, a lot of you work with the fonts, and it could be multi-script projects, or it could be a single script, single language project in Sri Lanka or any other place. But there could be this sort of synergy and the discussion. There should be a discussion between the people making the fonts and people using the fonts, I think. So as I would like to turn to Pooja regarding this, like how do you think this sort of discussion with the type makers and the type users is evolving in the region in India? What have you seen as a designer, and also maybe like after Muthu can also add a bit to that?
I think one of the things that is definitely happening a lot in India currently is for a lot of apps to now support multiple Indian languages, which say wasn't the case even 5 or 6 years ago. And it's interesting because a lot of these apps are those which now have to do very basic functions, the kind that you're talking about. So for instance, a few years ago, there was a huge push, and it continues to be there, about going cashless, right? So for everyone to use an app to pay for things. So it suddenly involved a larger number of people, and in the past people were okay with just having communication in English because those were the people with money, or anybody with that amount of money could also speak English and was quite comfortable in just communicating in that language. Because of the way the economy has turned out, the number of people that businesses are trying to communicate to is larger, and they all speak different languages, and so there is a need to speak to them in those languages. The unfortunate thing is that if you study design, I don't think there is a single sort of program in the entire country which focuses on anything except Latin. So if you're a designer who studied in India, you don't even know how to get InDesign to make a Devanagari font work. You just don't know how to do it. So in that sense, even though a large number of people today are expected to work in a multi-script sort of situation, most of them just do not have, they just don't have the basic knowledge to be able to do that. Even when they can do that, you see really, kind of strange things. Like for instance, a lot of news outlets, online ones, now will have 1 or 2 more languages supported apart from Latin, and they're going to basically use the same CSS for, let's say, the Devanagari. So in the Latin, which they've done rather well, they would have they would have tracked the headlines tighter because it's a little loose. And you do that to Devanagari, and it'll mean that you're going to have some pretty unsightly clashes. But it just doesn't even strike people that might be a problem, because they've never really spent any time even typing those languages. So to sort of turn your question around, I think a lot of what is required is right now infrastructure so that typography could be used, rather than just thinking of typography as infrastructure for people to use. I think right now people just don't know how to even use it. So I think it is at that level that the engagement first needs to happen, which is both like at the college level, but also people who are already working as designers, to just learn how these scripts and languages even work.
Now, in terms of requirements, and I agree with Pooja that the introduction of the smartphone and the apps have actually increased the demand for different variety of typefaces, even for apps that are released in this region, in these languages. Now, the earlier problem we had was to just make the script work. To get it to work flawlessly was already a challenge. So design was not even the question. Does it work? I mean, can it read? Can people read? Especially Sinhala. I mean, there are some apps that are still having problems. Well, I don't even want to go to the Indo-Chinese languages because the Khmer is such a complex combination of letters that softwares are struggling to do that. But anyway, that was a challenge. That was an early challenge. So to make it look nice was a secondary requirement. To make it work was a primary requirement. But today, especially with the boom of mobile gaming in this part of the world, people are just tired with standard UI fonts that are designed for buttons and labels. They don't work on say a game that is supposed to be like fun and adventure and going into the jungle. I mean, you can't just put like a Times Roman looking font in there. So that's actually increasing. I mean, that's a kind of request we get from the industry. Is to say we need a font that kind of matches this, that looks like a jungle, that looks like this, that looks like this. I think that's a good sign that people are actually beginning to see that users in this region are looking for that kind of variety or that kind of genre, and that probably can be a seed for future design development or varieties of type-based development in regional languages.
Thanks. So we'll take some questions later on, so you can start preparing if you have any questions for the panel. I would like to turn to Nana to ask this question about the expansion of the type and the usage. Whether we spoke about so Pooja spoke about the information that we need to disseminate about the usage, fonts or technicalities and other things. Is this something that you have seen, the lack of knowledge in Sri Lanka? Is it something that you face on day-to-day basis in the industry regarding these things, the language use and
No, I won't say it's a lack of knowledge. It's a good thing that we have additional mediums now that we have to play on, because if you take 5-6 years ago, maybe it was very much print driven, but now the mediums that we have to work on, it's multiple. So from gaming platforms to screens to audio visual, so that the demands have also increased. So I think that's a good thing, and that is kind of pushing you to look for solutions and look for ways that how can we make type work in that. Maybe there is a lack of knowledge when it comes to typographers and actually designers, because most of the people, I would say, in communication, advertising and communication, we don't come with a typography background, or we are not skilled in that. We kind of learn as you go along, most of them, I would say. So whereas I think the younger generation now has seen the need for it, and actually guys like you coming in and talking about type and specifically working on type as I've seen young people who now don't want to be art directors, they want to be designers or they want to be graphic designers, and ironically there are some people who want to be typographers, which was not a case some time back. So but there is a gap between knowledge that we have, some designers, and what can be done. But I think the newer generation and the people who are getting trained more and getting exposed more are kind of closing that gap.
Yeah, I think another thing is we are developing vocabulary and also ways to talk about certain things, which is an issue. When we talk about matching a Sinhala and a Latin typefaces or in a design, how to work with those things. I think we don't have the necessary vocabulary to explain these things, which some of the development that we'll see in the future is, I think, sort of developing vocabulary and the frameworks to talk and discuss about these things.
The new issues that are coming up, right now, what are the issues that we have right now? I mean, bill path is an issue, stray dog is an issue, and the type that you need to talk about those issues could be quite different. It's no more just communication solutions that you have to come up with, but there are issues that you have to come solutions for, and those issues will need actually the type that you use to come up with solutions for those needs is very important, and it needs to have its own voice and its own distinct identity.
Yes, exactly. I think I would like to turn to the audience if you have any questions or ideas to add at this discussion. Yes, feel free to. You have the microphone which you can turn on and yeah.
I think another big problem that we have in Sri Lanka is when it comes to design, people expect it free. Right? So, but that's a problem. I mean, we would not go to a doctor and say, hey, can you do a checkup for me as a portfolio job, right? Or to an architect, it's an opportunity. Hey, can you do this project because it's an opportunity job? But when it comes to designing or when it comes to typography, we would say the society is being told, or the designers are being told, hey, that what you're bringing to the table is not economically viable, and I think that conversation needs to change, because for typography also to be given that importance, it needs to become economically viable. That more and more people will be getting to it simply because you actually can make a living out of it, or that there would be a benefit to you. But like after years of putting into design, after investing in machinery, and learning so much, but if you're not going to be paid for it, then you would look for other ways for you to get that income. So it would mean you would rather than being a typographer, you would be an art director. So, which actually is sad, but I think that conversation is good that we are having that, and that needs to continue for the society to change, to say, hey, if it's design, I saw this nice one on FB once. If the people think that it's quite easy, but it's not, right? What it said was, if you think it's so easy, why don't you do it yourself, right? And we need to tell people, hey, that's the same thing. The reason why you bring a designer in is because you want design, and if a design is coming in, that design is not coming with just gut feeling. That design is coming with a background. It will be coming with training. He's coming with so many years, so many hours that he has put into honing that craft. They're coming with with educational qualifications, or with training that has gone into that person. They're coming in with machinery that they have invested in how to develop themselves to be where they are right now. So for that, there is a cost.
Yeah, I think sometimes, like in my personal experience, talking about type and typography, sometimes sort of shift this is not going to like change the clients who want like things for free, but sort of making a case for design in some cases, sort of investing in design. So when it comes to fonts and typography and typefaces, where I've found sometimes it's easier to make it when you go take this route of functionality, you have to communicate, and also talking about the identity, expressing the identity through type also as a function, rather than a sort of decorative element. I think that's something that we see changing in maybe in Sri Lanka and the region, sort of like shifting design from sort of producing pretty things to actually looking at like functional aspect. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a saying that when it's well designed, nobody's going to notice it because it looks perfect. But when there is lack of design, people are going to say something is wrong with it. So that's the role of the designer. So, and it's happening more and more that people are being exposed, and I mean, people travel, people are using products that are designed well. So people want actually design in their lives.
I think one of the things you mentioned is also relevant in what's the language you use for the client. And you mentioned earlier the case of Sri Lankan. So the person who authorizes the spend of a few $100,000 to buy a custom font for an airline is not a designer. It's way above a designer. It's someone who really doesn't care about design, but knows they need to have a distinctive identity because their airline needs to look different than the others. And that person will probably understand the economic argument. If you spend that much money now, then for the next however many years you own this intellectual property, and if you decide that you want to print Sri Lankan on the napkins, you can do it. If you want to change the uniforms of your personnel, you can do it and you don't have to pay extra. If down the line you decide to have an app that says, oh, Sri Lankan, I can check online, then you can bundle your font in there and it's yours. You own it. So actually the investment has a much longer life than if you license something that when you decide, oh, I want an app, you have to extend the license. It might be quite more expensive. So that kind of language is possible to have, but you need to speak the language that the client understands. It might be of intellectual property, of rights, of extensibility of contracts, of length of contracts, and so on, of any asset that they have. And you're talking about type, because it's infrastructure, the same way that he's talking about his fuel supply contracts. And for them, it's just one more asset in a long list of assets, even though we think, oh, it's special. Well, it's not. It's something that they need to get their business done. And they might treat it the same way as they treat a contract for pilot supply or whatever. And a lot of the designers often think that they need to talk about design, as you say, as a set of designed objects rather than something that has a certain value in enabling other functions of the company or the client to operate. And I think that is often a problem in design education, where we might not train graduates, certainly at bachelor's level, to have these kind of conversations. They go through because they have to defend their projects, they talk about their projects, their presentations. We don't necessarily put them enough in front of clients who might be lawyers or managers or accountants and say, talk now about your project in that person's language.
I think that's something that you find out as a fresh graduate, like going out, how to make a case. You're so used to sort of like defending the projects rather than like trying to make the case. Do we have it?
Yeah, I think we're just talking about how we need to articulate the value of fonts and typefaces to the client. I think that's, we're bringing very intangible value to a brand or whatever. But I think if we're talking about brand image, it's about differentiation, but we're talking something deeper than that, which is user experience or brand experience. Because it's about, how you experience a product or service, and it's not just an image that you're projecting. I think increasingly, with apps and digital services and platforms, we are actually, using typefaces as part of a larger scheme of things in terms of user experience. And I think that's the value. And, if the typefaces plays a big role in improving user experience, more clients get on board of the services, then there's some tangible things that we can tell the clients, look, this is really bringing in value because, you've increased your client base, etc. So,
Yeah.
It's a little bit, the question is about something that we were discussing in the morning about, typography and type design being such a low risk practice, that I'm wondering how one can start a dialogue about understanding the importance of typographic sensitivity to an audience. We spoke a little bit about, clients or people who are maybe making the investment, but what about the people who are consuming this type?
They're not consuming the type. They're consuming the product or the service. So if you take what Keith said, we talked about earlier, where does the value get created from the moment where I first come into contact with a service or brand or whatever, up to the point where I finish my transaction, which might be I've done my banking thing or I bought my trip or whatever. You can actually plan where the value gets created in different stages of the interaction, the risk that the user might abandon the service and might choose somebody else, because I like the product, but then there wasn't a reinforcement of my relationship with that, therefore I abandoned it for a competitor and so on. So you can see all of these sort of nexus points along this relationship. And type usually is quite central in all of these things, but it's never the type that the user really pays. It's like, nice letters. No, I can use the UI. I can actually book my ticket, I can get my service. So this idea of value that's generated, of risk that is controlled, that is, I think, what the users respond to. And we know from our own experience and from observations of how people interact that people are pretty terrible at distinguishing details between different things, but are extremely adept at determining different patterns. So they'll be able to tell just by driving the street, that this ATM belongs to this bank and this ATM belongs to that bank, simply because the pattern of the type or the colors or the combination of them reminds them of that kind of interaction. And if you ask them, why can you tell that this is a Barclays? I don't know, it's a Barclays thing. I don't know, it's a Barclays thing. Yeah. And it might have to do with the texture of the type. There is some very interesting recent research that is really crazy. With some archaeologists that uncovered, and I hope I reproduced this correctly, because this is really not my field, that were looking at the very first markings that proto-humans made in caves, long before they scratched pictures of people hunting animals. And the very first kind of scratchings they made were fairly abstract representations, and they were elementary ideas of symbols or counting and so on. So from the very early evolutionary days of humanity as a communicating species, we have things that are actually patterns of things, patterns of lines in small symmetrical arrangements, which look very much like forms of a script that you can't read. And the arguments that they were making, because they're trying to connect this to the acquisition of writing systems and so on, was that these fundamental configurations of shapes have conditioned our brain to respond very well to recognizing these differences in patterns. So therefore, we are evolutionarily conditioned to respond well to things that look like configurations, symbolic configurations of letter forms, much more so than configuration of petals in a flower. And from that, you can see that maybe we are quite well evolved to recognize these small differences between patterns of shapes. Somebody in the morning was talking about textures and the feeling of paragraphs. And that's fine. It means I don't need to really tell in what way these things are different. I just need to be able to tell that they are different enough. And that then allows me to make emotional associations with that stuff. Cue then the value that allows me to say, this is the trustworthy bank, and the letters on this ATM is something I do not recognize. Maybe all the stories I've heard about ATMs that will steal my card are about this one. I'm not going there. Right? And that's exactly how it works.
Coming back to, I think, Nana's point, which you stated, people want a return for their buck. Ultimately, how would you calculate the return on investment if a client was to invest in say, a corporate font for themselves? I mean, how would you calculate the return that you would generate?
Hello. Okay. When it comes to convincing someone, you need multiple bullets in your gun. You can't hit them with only one and knock them down, right? So one would be that it creates you an identity. The other one can be on the question that you asked as well, that this thing, the competition is high. Right now the economy is tight. So the brand also needs to differentiate itself. The whole brand experience, what he was talking about, each brand needs to have that differentiation, and type really plays a great part in doing that. But type is not the only thing that's going to create that. But type definitely is the foot forward in that. So that would be one. And then, what Gerry was saying was the investment. It's not a one-time investment. It's a long-term. It gives you long-term returns. So make your case with multiple arguments to sell it to a client. And then even I've seen we are having a separate conversation in Pathum on how to train the guys in my office. How can we train the art directors to know more about type. I've seen his portfolio of work, so that would help client to see, hey, then show them examples of what has worked in different markets, so that they realize, hey, it actually works. And even the simple example of the 10 years ago, how much did Sri Lankan Airlines? I think they paid about almost $500,000 just to develop that type, and $500,000 at that time is equivalent to about 4-5 million now, considering inflation. So those are have multiple arguments, and hopefully we would have actually people investing in type because it is important. And this example of if certain countries, even if the government services are using that, in that way the private brands have much bigger budgets that they can play with. So because I worked at MAS before Burnett, and that was one conversation that we were having. Okay, how can we develop a font to this big company? Because over 5,000 machines, and they are present in 16 countries. That brand needs to communicate in one voice.
If I'll just add to that, I think you spoke about having so many computers. I think the cost of licensing is one of the biggest arguments that is being used in a lot of international companies developing their own fonts, because how font licensing works is you install it on one computer, and then there's a limit to the usage or the number of computers that you can install. So instead of buying a license, you can develop your own, so it's cost effective in scale. And I think clients always, in any context, they like to feel special. So addressing the specific needs is something I think that could work. For example, a banking institute would need a font which has maybe all the currency symbols, because they have, right? Or they might need, they could then use it, making case for the whole spectrum of things that they do from, for a bank, I would say, you can use it in your all your material, and then that font can be engineered and designed specifically to those needs. The currency symbols is a very clear example, but I think when you look at the industries, you can go into the specific clients, workflows and things they do, and maybe figure these out. Just to add.
If you look around, the examples of this are numerous. Anything that has to do with wayfinding has a bunch of arrows. What, are you using some generic string of arrows that might have corners and angles that have nothing to do with the shapes of the letters and might look much darker or much lighter? Or are you using arrows that are coordinated with the style and weight of your typeface? If you have a typeface that will respond differently to whether it's positive or negative, depending on whether it's black on white or white on black, do all the elements also adjust their weight accordingly so that it will render correctly? If you have to send that typeface to somebody who will make the signs, who runs their plotter or the sort of vinyl cutter or whatever, then if you have the font, then you actually have the right to give it to them. A normal license for a commercial would not allow you to do them, would require them to buy another copy of the license so that they can install to their machine, which you will have to pay on their invoice. It also might mean that they might be able to make small changes to the font, or the font already exists on their system with small changes, which might create substitutions. Then you might want to send your email out to people, and increasingly you see circulars having things like emojis in. Now, at the moment, we don't see emojis being part of brands. I'm pretty sure that within 3 years, tops, a lot of brand projects will include their own emojis, because we're not at the stage where a lot of commercial newsletters go out with emojis in the headings or in the text. 5 years ago, this didn't happen. Emojis would be used by young people for informal communications. But now, it's part of quite a lot of standard communication. So if you're, again, Vodafone or something, and you're sending a newsletter with emojis, why would your emojis look exactly like the random emojis that somebody gets on iMessage or Facebook or something? Because their weight might be different, the colors are completely odd. You might want to control the symbolism of specific emojis. So maybe your typeface also has its own set of emojis, not a full set, you don't need to do everything, but the ones that you want to use for your brand communications. And maybe you want to have a couple of different sets that might only work in a specific way for black and white, or ones that are for color, or ones for screen, and so on. So then your custom typeface is a typeface that has the letters, but it has a lot of other stuff that will enable a smooth and consistent communication across all the different platforms that you're using. Then again, I mentioned wayfinding. What about the little icons, the little sort of men and women walking and the little children and so on? Are they just random icons that are fished from some, what is the Dingbat font? Well, if you spent all the money actually to have a control system and so on, well, maybe the shape of the figures is also related to the visual language that we are rolling out. So you might want to say these will also be controlled. And you can see the importance of this when you see big schemes for pictograms for large events like the Olympics that are around the corner, or similar events in big transport systems where they would be totally designed to try to get all of these things to work well. Now, and one thing you made this mention, they work well also means that they don't break the system, in the sense that I don't need 3 different fonts to typeset a single sign, one for the arrows, one for the letters, one for the symbols. I can bundle everything in one font. It will render much more cleanly through any production process. So there are multiple benefits to thinking a bit more holistically about the typefaces.
Hi, I'm Nushka, and I don't come from a typography background, but a translation background. I'm a translator too, and I own a translation company called We Translate. So we do also it's very must be really basic, but we also come across a lot of font issues, when we're in Unicode is. So the clients always prefer, when it's come to print, when they're gonna print the document or something, they prefer it in FM fonts. If it's in Sinhala, it's Abaya or something, or if it's Tamil, it's Bamini. So what is the issue is say that we have it in Unicode. So when you read it on a computer, you can read Unicode easily, but not Bamini. So there are issues like that. So how would you link these typography translators? Do you see any link between those two? Or
we used to have this phrase called, if it ain't broken, why fix it? So I think that's probably the mindset of people who have been using the legacy encoding have. So if they're comfortable with PageMaker running on Windows 98 or 95, and it's been working well for 30 over years, why go change that? All right? And it's very hard to convince them because the process of change is very tedious. They have to learn a new system altogether, a new way of, the entire workflow changes. So they don't want to go through that. The issue is not, I don't think the issue has anything to do with design. They may hate those fonts for all I know, but they don't have a choice. I mean, they don't want to go through, they don't want to pay the price of change or the benefits are not valuable enough for them to do the switch. Perhaps, if we have all these problems solved and you have like really fantastic looking typefaces coming into the market, and then you say, hey, I want those things, then you have to switch, right? Until then, it's very difficult to convince them to change. I think it's more economical reason than design reasons. I don't think the time to change is drawing near. We have the same issue in Malaysia too. I mean, people still use PageMaker to do magazines. Right? But when they get articles from contributors and they all come in Unicode and say, hey, what do I do with this? Right? Of course, they have converters, but how long are they going to do that? So that actually increases their workflow process. So when they hit into this problem, that's when it changes. And I have another story that I can share with those who are finding it difficult to sell, especially when users ask for free or for a cup of coffee. I used to give them this triangle, right? It's got 3 apexes. So it's got fast, it's got cheap, and it's got good, right? You can only have 2 of those. If you want to have fast and good, it won't be cheap. If you want to have good and cheap, it won't be fast, right? You can only have 2 of them. You can explain that story to them. So that's the reason why they don't want to change. They want all 3 together. You give me something that is fast, that is good, that is cheap, then I will change. But that's not going to happen.
Yeah, so we are running out of time and we are going to close the session. I'll just, we can have these conversations, and the good thing is we have a platform that we can have these conversations, especially if you think about the Unicode and non-Unicode issue. It's just something that all of everybody that works in fonts and typographic and text technologies have it's an issue. And for at least Sri Lanka, we have built a platform like everybody together to sort of discuss these things, and with the university and University of Moroto, and also the lot of the other community coming together under Akuru Collective. So what we are sort of thinking of going forward from this point is to sort of discuss this as a common shared issues and sort of try to solve this, because the issue you have as a translator is the same issue is affecting the publishing industry and also the advertising industry, where there's not enough Unicode fonts. And even if we do Unicode fonts, we have been producing Unicode fonts, but these are not being used and cannot be used in certain cases. And I think the times are changing, because at least from my personal experience, I've seen the queries and complaints about this is increasing. Yeah. So I think it's a good sign, and especially as a translator, I think it's hell to actually work with these things, because you translate the text, and if you encode it in again ASCII, there's no difference between the text. So yeah, to wrap up the session, we have some we have a video from our last event. We'll just take a look at that.
Was how we can make simple tools out of the pencils and pens we have at home.
never thought that simple tools like a popsicle stick can be used to do calligraphy.
The tradition of Ola leaf writing has played an integral part in our written tradition of Sri Lanka, and it's clearly a dying art, and I thought that it would be wonderful just to go deep into this and see what this is all about.